مساء الخير.
شلونك؟
أهلا دكتور.
أخبارك بخير؟
يعطيك العافية، شو أخبارك؟
الحمد لله بخير.
الله يسلمك. خليني بس أعرفك عن حالي، أنا مركز القنة.
أهلا.
من KCST. يعطيك الصحة والعافية، كيف أمورك؟
شو أخبارك أنت؟
الحمد لله كله تمام نشكر الله. بس خلينا ننتظر شوي لغاية ما الطلبة يتجمعوا.
خير إن شاء الله.
أوكي تمام.
أبغى ميوت.
أوكي تمام ما في مشكلة.
How are we doing? Are there any students? No students? ما في حد؟
في هلا بس let's wait for a couple of minutes. بيكونوا خلصوا هلا class.
So
let them join.
We're waiting 10 minutes?
No, 2 minutes, couple of minutes.
Okay, so because I can make another call while I'm waiting. It's okay. Okay, fine. Wait.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Naif. I think we can start now.
Okay.
Already the session is recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube. We can start now to save time. والطلبة بيجوا على مهلهم.
On YouTube in a public channel or a private channel?
It's a public channel. هي channel KCST. So we list the video to be public.
Okay. Great. So, okay. So you want to talk about drugs and well-being, so I'm gonna start off with some general things, and then talk more specifically about kind of the problem in Kuwait, and then talk about ways to deal with it. So as a general rule, any country that forbids alcohol has an increased use in drugs. Okay, and we see that very much in Kuwait. I see too many stories that are very sad. And when I say sad, it's because you know kids by nature, college age kids, anybody's a kid when you're below 50, as far as I'm concerned. But people want to experiment, and when they experiment, sometimes their genetics don't allow for the experimentation to be something that's productive, let alone healthy for them. And one thing that I keep seeing in Kuwait specifically, because most of my practice is here, although I do practice in Qatar and Dubai and Bahrain, etc. But I rarely see the drug issues that I see here. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means I don't see them. It means they're going somewhere else. But one of the things that has been impressing me, and when I say impressed, not in a positive way, but kind of makes an impression on me, is the amount of people who end up with what's called a drug-induced psychosis. And what that means is this: so some people, can try something and they can be okay and have a good time, etc. Some people can try something once and end up in the mental hospital, and they can end up there for life. Okay, so the issue doesn't necessarily become that of, you know, the drug that was experimented with. It becomes that of the drug in combination with the person's biology or DNA. And so one piece of advice I tell anybody who's thinking about doing anything like that, besides, you know, besides don't do it, because they're not coming to me to, you know, I'm not their moral authority. I'm not there to tell them to do or not what not to do. What I tell them is this. I say, if you have anybody in the family that has any kind of mental issue, then when you try any of these drugs, it's like you're playing Russian roulette. Because it may be okay one day, 2 days, but one day it's gonna happen, is you're gonna lose it, and you might lose it for good. And one story that I've told a few times, which I can tell you now, is a few years ago I got pulled into somebody's house. I don't do house calls, I don't like it, but in Kuwait, you know, somebody, they pull you in, and I went into this person's house, and the boy, he was a college student, you know, had the long beard, the short dasha. I mean, he definitely looked the role of the pious Muslim. He was completely psychotic, you know, had lost his mind, was talking to things only he could see. Sheikh ad-Din held him by his hair, reading the Quran on him. You know, the dad was like the boy, you know, the long beard, the short dasha, mom's completely covered. And I do a quick scan and noticed the Sheikh had a pen in his pocket. And so I turned to my friend who brought me there and I said, get the pen out of the Sheikh's pocket because this boy can grab the pen and stab him. And the last time I saw something like that was when I worked in the emergency room at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. So now when I'm in my practice, somebody comes to see me as a patient or as a client, I don't see psychosis anymore unless somebody's on medication. That's not what I do. And so I went to the father, and you know, I'm very New York. I don't say salam alaikum, which maybe I should. I don't drink coffee. I'm in and out. And so I said, listen, does your son do drugs? And he said, no, miltizm. I said, barakallah fi. I said, I want you to pray to God he does drugs, because if he doesn't do drugs, the boy's not coming back to you. So the father didn't like my approach, which I understand. But I left because, you know, but the next day he called me to apologize. And he said, Wallah, had you not talked to me in that way, I wouldn't have looked to try to prove you wrong. But my son and his cousin and their friends, so 3 boys, had 1 joint of marijuana together. These 2 boys had a great time. This boy lost it all, right? And if you do research online, just go on Google and write down schizophrenia and marijuana, or psychosis and marijuana, or bipolar disorder and marijuana, you'll see there's a correlation for a lot of people. And that's what people call drug-induced psychosis. So if I had let this boy's Halloween costume of the beard and the short dasha fool me, right, he'd end up in the mental hospital for a very long time. But because I cut through it, because I've been doing this for a while, I was able to get to that really quickly. And so when they went to the hospital, you know, they said, you know, it was drug-induced psychosis, which means what? Which means he still goes on the medication, but it means he has a chance of getting past the problem, right? So he goes on medication for a few months or a year, then he comes off the medication, and then we see. If the symptoms repeat, then khalas, he's got this issue for life, he's be on medication for life. If they don't repeat, then as long as he stays away from the drugs, he's fine. Now, a lot of people end up ignoring that advice and they keep going back to the drug, and that becomes a real issue for them, you know, but you do what you need to do and you educate. And every year, well, it's been a couple of years now because of Corona, but before Corona, every year in September, December, and May, I'll get, I'll get at least a dozen students, maybe 18, 20, who've lost their scholarship in the US or on probation from the US or the UK because they got involved in drugs and alcohol, and end up, you know, coming back to Kuwait because their parents found out or the Ba'tha found out and they pulled it. And if I got 20, that means there's at least 200, right? I'm not the only psychologist in Kuwait. So there's, you know, and so I went to the ministry because I'm on the Supreme Education Council when it used to exist. I heard they just stopped it. And I said, listen, this is going on. You know, I'd like to be able to kind of give, you know, lectures to Awiyah for people to kind of be aware of the stuff. And they said, no, this is naqs wazi' dini. I said, maybe, but how about some educational information as well? It didn't fly in any, I'm not there to change the world, but this is one of the real issues that we have. And the big part of it is, you know, this kind of culture of not really talking about it, right? And so the first time, you know, people hear about drugs and alcohol, it's from some other source, right? So I have 6 boys, and my eldest, I remember the first conversation I had with him about drugs was, you know, he was very young because he had heard about it in school. And so I made it a point to talk to him about it. And I knew if I didn't, somebody else would. And that somebody else, I can't judge what their intentions are going to be. right? But I think a lot of parents do shy away from talking to their children about these things. They're better off saying, don't do it, la, haram, la, but that's not enough, right? And it's not enough, especially because research shows that the most important element in terms of your child ending up like you is if they have a good relationship with you. If they don't, they're not going to want to be like you. It's that simple. That's why I see a lot of people who are very free and open, their kids end up being very religious. If a lot of people are very religious, their kids end up being very open. That's because they didn't have a good relationship with their parents. I mean, it's not a standard gold rule, but it's very much there as a presence. One thing also when it comes to drugs, and I'm gonna where'd you guys go? I can't see you. Here we go. One thing that kind of I will put under the rubric of drugs is alcohol. So let's talk about substance abuse. So alcohol, and so there's a really interesting article that came out in 1964 in Time magazine. The way the article is written is very offensive as an Arab Muslim, and back then it was very Oriental in terms of kind of how they spoke about those Arabs kind of thing. But the facts of the article are actually quite interesting. And the facts of the article was this. In 1964, when Parliament in Kuwait banned alcohol, 200 people went blind that night because they drank cologne. Okay, so some people kind of who become alcoholic end up needing the drink, and so if they don't have the alcohol, they'll switch to other things. That's why you have now, for example, a lot of issues in Kuwait of the homemade stuff where people end up dying or getting sick. And so, but the interesting thing for me recently in terms of alcohol is, I've had at least 8 patients in the last 3 years who became alcoholic after doing the gastric sleeve surgery, the removal of the stomach for weight loss. And it's interesting, and it's not, again, it's not talked about, but the interesting thing for me is this. So one of the people that I came across, so when I do an intake, when I'm sitting with somebody in a session, I typically, take a family history, social history, etc., and then talk about any surgeries they've had towards the end, medical conditions. This one person who came in, within 2 minutes, I knew what the problem was. I mean, you could tell from his head was this big, his body was this small. There was a surgery, the bariatric surgery that had happened. So it's clear to me that his alcoholism was tied to that. And the reason for that is, when the surgery is done, the part of the stomach that digests alcohol or begins the digestion of alcohol gets removed. The other problem is that you can't eat and drink in the same meal because it becomes uncomfortable, because the part of the stomach that stretches is taken away. So if you drink alcohol, you have the choice between drinking and eating. So if you're going to drink, you're not going to eat. And if you're going to drink and not eat and not get digested, you have raw alcohol going into your blood, right? For some people, it's a real trigger. And so the interesting story I want to tell you is this one guy in his 60s who came to see me a few years ago. And, I didn't think about asking about surgery till the end because, I mean, he didn't look like he's done any surgeries. He looked kind of not fat, not thin. He was just kind of just normal kind of, And then the interesting thing for me is, when you start becoming alcoholic, 2012, he was already in his late 50s, early 60s, any surgeries, yes. What you have, bariatric sleeve, same year. So it's fascinating, right? And I mean, it's fascinating to hear about, not to actually experience. So I mean, this is very problematic for a lot of people. But one thing to keep in mind, and I know there's a very big incidence of doing the bariatric surgery in Kuwait. I myself had it 6 years ago. But to keep in mind that when you do think about doing that, one thing that's missed here is a consultation with the psychologist that understands. And the reason it's important is because when you're addicted to food and you don't solve the addiction to food, then that addiction will become drugs, alcohol, something else. It'll kind of morph. And so it's very important to kind of be in, because a lot of people kind of, they lose the weight, they gain it all back. Another interesting thing that I mentioned that is part of my lecture at the medical school about this issue is this. A very interesting thing is that, when we go and have coffee, okay, so whatever your favorite coffee shop is, Arabica, Starbucks, whatever, the minute you walk into that coffee shop or see the logo, what happens to your body? Your body starts reducing its heartbeat, reducing its temperature. It reduces. Why? Because it knows caffeine's coming. And when caffeine comes, it takes it back to normal, okay? That's why it takes more and more of the same substance. In this time, we're talking about caffeine, right? to get the same buzz. Okay. But for example, if I gave you coffee, and I'm notorious, my students know that I don't allow coffee in the classroom. So, but if I give you coffee in a place that you don't usually have it, right? At a time you don't usually have it, your body won't adjust. So the minute you have that coffee, you'll get the buzz ala tool. It'll come up immediately. Okay. So this is ideal. So some people die what's called a drug overdose. So even I thought up until maybe 10 years ago that drug overdose meant the person took too much of the drug, right? But in fact, most people who die of drug overdoses took the drug either in a different part of their body or a different geographic location than usual. So just like when you see the logo of Starbucks, you see the place where you usually take the drug or the part of the body you usually take the drug, and your body tries to adjust in anticipation of what's coming. And so people who don't, like for example, they're at a party and here, try this, that person is more likely to die of a drug overdose than somebody who's used to taking it. I'm not telling you to get used to taking it, I'm just going to explain some concepts. The other thing that's interesting kind of, to share is that, marijuana, for example, is not addictive, okay? Whereas cigarettes are addictive. And this is kind of the things where the fine lines are drawn by society, right? So marijuana, so what's an addiction? An addiction is the following. An addiction is based on two things. Something called tolerance and something called withdrawal. Tolerance means I need to take more and more of the same drug or more and more cigarettes or more coffee or more to get the same buzz, to get that feeling I'm looking for. Okay, alcohol, whatever. Withdrawal means if I stop taking it, I'm going to feel pain. Okay, now the pain can be anything from the headache of Ramadan because you didn't have coffee that morning, right? Or it can be the pain of stopping heroin, right? It's the same concept. Now marijuana doesn't cause that, right? Marijuana, there is no withdrawal. So with marijuana, it's more of a dependence, not an addiction. Now, is smoking marijuana a good idea? No. For a lot of people, it's a very bad idea. But some people what happens is, one of the questions I always ask people when they tell me that they use substance, I tell them, well, are you doing it to feel good? Or are you feeling bad and want to feel normal? And the problem is this. So some people because they feel bad, will smoke up, or because they feel bad, will drink. So they're self-medicating. Right? So there it's more about an issue of let's solve the problem, let's see what this is, because the reality is even people who have a good time smoking, if they smoke too much, with time it kills anything to do with motivation. The surfer dude thing, oh, hey dude, cool, let's just hang out on the beach and do nothing, that kind of thing. I mean, if that's the kind of life you want to live in your parents' basement and play video games all day, knock yourself out, smoke yourself up, right? But at the end of the day, habitual use of it, even though it's not addictive, will lead to problems. Now, the interesting thing, when it comes to the use of substances and how it play, or the legalization of substances and the effect it has in terms of consumption. So, what's that? Things that are banned are more wanted, kind of thing, right? So. Whenever there's when there was prohibition on alcohol in the US, people drank a lot more. When there's the prohibition, now that marijuana has been legalized in a few states in the US, more and more states, actually marijuana consumption has come down, it has not gone up, right? This idea that, people are going to, so we need to really explore, again, I'm not calling for legalization of marijuana. What I am saying is that, there are some things that can be done about curbing drug use in the country. And one of them, may well be legalizing the alcohol, because what's happening is it's a disaster. And I see it in the work I do. And again, I'm not telling you to drink. I'm just saying about how on a societal level, we can deal with, reducing the number of people, because the reality is that person who's doing that drug when they're on the road driving, end up killing a relative of yours because they're under the influence. So that's any what I tidbits of what I want to share to do with drugs and drug abuse. So, how do you, what do you do if you're addicted to a drug? So it depends. So some drugs, like methamphetamines or shabu, as it is here, or heroin or stuff like that. When people call and say, "Hey, I'm addicted. Can you help?" I said, "No, I can't help. You need to go to rehab, and that's not mujamma rehab, hawali. That's rehab. Someplace where they're going to have you for a few months and kind of to detox. But if it's something like Lyrica or marijuana or Neurontin, whatever the popular kind of pills people are popping these days, that I can be more helpful with, but not alone, with a psychiatrist. Okay, because the thing is, what has to happen there is some medication has to come in to take the place of the effect of it, so that it can come down. The other kind of thing that is a real killer is chemical. I mean, chemical, I don't know if you know this or not, used to be sold fil baqalat legally up until like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They didn't know. Yeah, people come in and just smoke it. Then I think finally the government caught on and banned it. But I've seen that fry so many people's brains, and it's not a joke. People think, oh, it's a cheaper form of marijuana. No, it's not. It's a way to fry your brain. And it's really unfortunate what I've seen in terms of people who use that. That I can't help with either, unless somebody's gone through rehab. So very important to make your choices. In the end, what I tell people is, where do you want to be in a few years? I get that people want to take the edge off. I get that we live I spend most of my time in Dubai now. So you live in a place that doesn't have many options when it comes to tarfih, to entertainment, and it's terrible. And now that you see what's happening with Saudi, who did a 180 and left us in their dust, which is good for them, salahatan. We have a real issue. So the kids have nothing to do, no way to kind of take their minds off of stuff, and it's an explosion waiting to happen. It's happening all around us, and you see this now with the violent crimes, with the armed bank robbery yesterday, the suicides. I mean, it's increasing, and I think part of that has to do with the social kind of makeup and the contrived rules. I call Kuwait a financeable social experiment. It'll eventually fail. But it's a social experiment that somebody decided, to finance, and I think eventually it'll catch up with itself, and that's unfortunate. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have about substance abuse in general or substances that I can answer. There's some exciting research now that's being done. There's some companies who have gone public, made a lot of money for their investors, that are using magic mushrooms or psilocybin for depression and for PTSD. So there's definitely, ketamine is used for treatment. So there's definitely some very good uses of some of these drugs for mental health, but only if it's done with a professional who knows what they're doing. I don't, so it's not me, and it's not legal here anyway, but somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows how to dose it, who knows what you need to do. Not, hey, this is good for my depression, let me go buy it from the drug dealer. That's not the way to do this. Just like it's not the way to kind of just take your own medication from whatever pharmacy. So I'm not against, experimentation at all. I have 6 boys, and when they tell me they want to try something, I'm much more lenient. My father will probably kill me if he hears this. But I also it's very important to educate and to understand what the parameters are, and to know kind of, when you need help. And I'll end with just one thing in terms of this for the questions is, if you ever think about doing any of this stuff, never do it when you're having a bad day, or you failed an exam, or you just had a breakup. Not that anybody's dating in Kuwait, because people don't do that here, right? So just never do it when something bad just happened, right? Because then it's a disaster, right? That's not what you do. When you're having a bad day, you talk to your friend, right? You just don't experiment then. And happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay. يعطيك العافية دكتور.
الله يعافيك.
To be honest, يمكن احنا صار لنا هذا الأسبوع بالذات احنا مركزين على موضوع الدراجز. يعني محاضرتك كانت شيقة بالنسبة لي على القليلة، فيعطيك ألف عافية. عندي سؤال دائما بضل أسأله، هو من باب الفضول مش من أي شيء ثاني. تبعا لتجربة حضرتك أو الإكسبيرينس، أنا آسفة، تبعا للإكسبيرينس تبعت حضرتك سواء بالكويت أو بدبي أو بنيويورك، نسبة البنات إلى الشباب كإدمان، يعني خلينا نركز بس على إدمان المخدرات، مش إدمان الألكوهول أو any kind of addiction، مين الأعلى؟
It's the same. أنا يعني in my practice ما شفت فرق يعني بين الشباب والبنات، يعني they're equally susceptible. يعني ما في فرق، ما في ذاك الزود. يمكن يكون الفرق بين نوعية الدراجز، بس حتى هالشيء يعني يعني ما شفت. يعني فرضا لما تسأليني فرضا عن الانتحار، أقول لك والله الشباب يعني البنات ينتحرون أكثر من الشباب، بس الشباب يموتون أكثر من البنات بالانتحار. ليش؟ لأن البنات يأخذون حبوب،
فغسيل معدة بيختصر
الشباب
موضوع
ياخذ له
غسيل
مسدس ولا يشنق نفسه، فمور فايلنت. زين، فهاي مع الاحصائيات موجوده، بس in terms of who use more drugs it's pretty much equal الاثنين.
حتى بالكويت؟
في كل مكان.
اوكي.
كل مكان يعني ما في هالفرق. So what do you do when you're having a really bad day? هاي السؤال الجاني. So when you're having a really bad day, يعني I would do one of a few things. I mean, you can talk to a professional, you can talk to your friends, you can learn ways in which to cope. So there are some great apps out there like Calm, like Headspace. I have one launching soon called Tuhun. You can sign up on the website. TUHOON is the Hawin coming out end of November, early December, which will have meditation, mindfulness, sleep stories, hypnotherapy, Quran, ruqya, listening to Quran while under hypnosis, which is something I came up with, which I'm looking forward to getting in trouble for. But just kind of there's stuff in our culture, like I mean some people for them when they read Quran they feel a lot better, and that's fantastic. For some people need something else, and that's fantastic too. There is no one way to get there, right? But also learning ways through which to think about things. So for example, like one of the things I have on the app is a 10-day course on CBT, on how to change the way you think to change the way you feel, right? That can be very, very important, because the idea there is how do I go from unhealthy negative emotions to healthy negative ones? Like instead of being angry, being annoyed, instead of being depressed, being disappointed, instead of being anxious, being worried, instead of guilt, remorse. Because the problem with the 4 unhealthy negative ones is we go into fight or flight, right? And flight is where drug use comes in, right? I'm feeling bad, so I take drugs. So we don't want flight, we don't want fight. We want the stuff in the middle. Hypnosis and alcohol both give temporary relief. Actually, that's not necessarily true. So hypnotherapy, if done by a professional, again, I'm not telling you that I helped everybody that came to me. What I can tell you is most people who practice in the region. So let me just give you something about the region. So I'm licensed in 6 countries. Kuwait's the only country where I'm not licensed by the Ministry of Health, because Kuwait doesn't license psychologists, they license psychiatrists. So I'm licensed by Wizat Tijara. So I can sell my license to an Uber driver, and he can open a clinic and see you as a patient. How's that for Kuwait? Okay. So the problem you have here is that a lot of people who are practicing who should not be practicing. So like in Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Dubai gave me an exam, New York gave me an exam. They really check your credentials. Here they say you have a heartbeat, you're good, right? So then, and why I'm bringing this up is this. So there are 2 main schools of hypnotherapy. One is called NGH, which pretty much everybody in the region has their certification. In fact, they certified a cat one. Somebody wanted to prove they certify anybody, so they applied for their cat, and their cat is certified to do hypnosis. Then there's ASH, which is the American Society for Clinical Hypnosis, which only certifies licensed healthcare professionals, and that's more of a clinical hypnosis working with psychological issues. Now, does that guarantee it's going to help? No. Some people aren't susceptible, but it's not long term. If it's done properly, I mean, I'll give you a snapshot of somebody. This one person came to me a few years ago, had a fear of flying, now flies everywhere. Came back to me to quit smoking. 1 session after 30 years of smoking, he quit for years. But he came back to me to lose weight. I tried 5 times and I failed 5 times. Okay, not because I don't know what I'm doing, because I obviously helped him in those 2 situations. Not because he's not susceptible, because obviously it worked, because he wasn't ready to give up his food. So hypnosis really requires that you want to make that change. I can't do it to you, right? You do it to yourself with help from me. And that's the difference between temporary relief and long-term relief. Okay. Is this the same person? Oh, same person. It's Aldania. Okay. I think I answered the question.
Yes, she's Dania. So I think إنه هي she was giving an example.
Got it.
فإذا بس بتقولنا إنه الإكزامبل اللي هي عطته يعني make sense ولا مش شرط.
Okay. جاوب ثاني. في أي سؤال ثاني؟ Anybody else have questions?
في حدا عنده أسئلة؟ Guys. طيب احنا دكتور طبعا من خلال تقريبا 2 weeks رح نبلش الميدتيرمز، وفي بعض الناس بيواجهوا صعوبة أو عندهم بتصيبهم حالة من التوتر أو الفزع أو الهلع قبل الاختبارات، فممكن يلجأوا إنه يعني مثلا ممكن يصير لهم بريك داون مثلا، أو يلجأوا لل مثلا زي مشروبات الطاقة اللي
disaster.
فبس إذا بتعطينا نصيحة على هذا الموضوع أو تأثير مشروبات الطاقة أصلاً.
خلينا ناخذ ستيب باك من مشروبات الطاقة. So معظم الناس اليوني عندهم panic attacks، نوبات هلع or anxiety. هاي come to me أنا قاعد نسيت قاعد أتكلم عربي ولا إنجليزي؟ I forgot what I was speaking to you in English صح؟ We're doing English.
هو إحنا كنا طول السيشن عم نحكي إنجليش، فعلى راحتك يعني.
إيش تبونه كيفكم اللي تبونه يعني. بس معظم الناس اليوني عندهم مشاكل بهالشيء، بس الكل يتكلم عربي بالسيشن.
يس الكل عم بيحكي عربي. كل اللي بالسيشن بيحكي عربي.
معظم الناس اليوني متى يوني بهلع وانكزايتي؟ برمضان وبعد رمضان. ليش؟ المشكله مو رمضان، المشكله الثقافه الكويتيه. رمضان فات بسهر، هذه اللي doesn't make sense يعني. مره المخ ما يرضى سنه سنتين يعني بسهر طول الليل وبصوم وانا نايم. يعني اولا يعني المخ يعني النوم والمشاكل النفسيه شارع بحدين. شلون؟ اذا انا عندي مشكله نفسيه راح ياثر على نومي، بس اذا انا اتفلسف وما نام واسهر للفجر تمام راح يعطيني مشاكل. يعني فرضا انا اذا ما نام عدل مالي خلق اسوي شيء، ما اقدر اركز، اكون عصبي، اللي قدامي راح اكله يعني حتى لو مو جوعان. هاي كلها اعراض اكتئاب. انا ماني مكتئب، لكن لو سويت هالشيء بنومي يوم على يوم على يوم راح اولد الاكتئاب بنفسي. اوكي. فهاي رقم واحد. رقم اثنين، انتم بعمر ذا بالجامعه محتاجين بين 8 9 ساعات نوم. اللي نام 6 ساعات في اليوم على مدى 10 ايام كانه مواصل 24 ساعه. اوكي، احسبها. لو شهر نايم بس 6 ساعات في اليوم كانه مواصل 3 ايام، لو سنه 30 يوم. والمخ يدفع كاش، المخ ما يغشمر. سنه سنتين ثلاث راح يفصل. شيء ثاني، النوم في نوعين نوم، في النوم الريمي والنوم اللا ريمي. شو الفرق؟ النوم الريمي هو REM Rapid Eye Movement، وين العين تتحرك والواحد يحلم. النوم اللا ريمي هو النوم الاولاني الاساس. فاول النوم دائما لا ريمي، اخر نوم ريمي. اوكي. النوم اللا ريمي ليش مهم؟ النوم اللا ريمي المخ ياخذ الاشياء المهمه يخزنها حق الامتحان، حق بعدين، والمو مهم يقطها. بالنوم الريمي المخ يعني العين تتحرك، فالمخ ياخذ الاشياء اللي بيخشها ويخزنها بالذاكره طويله المدى. زين. لكن النوم ما هو نتفلكس. لما تتفلسف وتنام الفجر تمام، معظم النوم اللاري ريمي راح عليك. ايش معنات هالشيء؟ اولا راح تتفزز كل شويه من نومك، لان المخ يدش على طول على الاحلام. الشيء الثاني اللي يصير ان المخ راح يخزن اللي اكو واللي ماكو، مو بس الاشياء المهمه. فراح ياثر على تركيزك، وراح ياثر على ذاكرتك وعلى كل شيء. فاقول انا حق طلبتي بالطب، اذا طبعا افضل شيء حق الامتحانات رقم واحد، شيء انا اقول لهم رقم واحد، اذا بتاخذ امتحانك ببيجامتك زين فادرس ببيجامتك. بس اذا تاخذ امتحانك وانت لابس جينز وتي شيرت وات ايفر، البس نفس الشيء. ليش؟ لان المخ لما يتذكر شيء يتذكر كل شيء، مو بس الماده. هاي اللي remembers in context على قولتهم. فرضا اذا قلت لك والله منو درسك لغه عربيه بصف الثاني ابتدائي، طبعا كذا راح اتذكر لانه كان رعب بالنسبه لنا. بس منو درسك اللغه الانجليزيه بثاني ابتدائي يمكن ما تنسى. زين اوكي. بس لو وديتك الفصل مالك وقعدتك بالكرسي نفسه راح تذكر. ليش؟ لان الكونتكست. هاي رقم واحد. فدائما ادرس بالطريقه وبمكان مشابه لمحل الامتحان. رقم واحد. رقم اثنين، اذا انت ما عندك غير 4 ساعات نوم قبل الامتحان، لان حضرتك ما درست طول المده وسويت لاست مينت دراسه، افضل لك تنام من 10 ل 2 الفجر وتقوم وتدرس الى وقت الامتحان، من تقوم تنام وتقوم 2 الفجر وتدرس. ليش؟ سوري، من ان يعني افضل لك تنام اول، مو تدرس اول بعد تنام 2 الفجر. ليش؟ لان انت الحين محتاج معلومات حق ثاني يوم، فمو محتاج ذاكره طويله المدى، هذه محتاج بس شورت تيرم ميموري. هذا راح يصير بالاول اول شيء مو اخر شيء. It's very unhealthy. 4 to 5 hours sleep is very unhealthy. You need 8 hours a night every night. Sleeping 6 hours a night is like you being up for 24 hours every 10 days. So it's very unhealthy. وكل الناس يقول والله أنا متعود. لا، ما حد متعود. One of the best books I read وموجود في اللغة العربية اسمه Why We Sleep. لماذا ننام؟ موجود بذات سلاسل. Fascinating book. يعني يتكلم عن النوم، يعني مو بس بني آدم، حتى الحيوانات. ويعني فرضا interesting fact، الطيور لما تطير بالليل، لما تطير شيء فورميشن شيء يطير صح؟ هذول كل عيونهم مصككه. هذا عين اليمين مفتوحه وهذا عين اليسار مفتوحه، ويصيرون العيون حق المجموعه كلها. النوم شيء علم يعني رهيب، بس احنا مو فاهمينه صراحه، وهاي يؤدي لمشاكل وايده.
اوكي دكتور.
وبالنسبه لمشروبات الطاقه طبعا
صحيح،
تزيد طلقات القلب، ويعني اتس ديزاستر، يعني قهوه اوكي الصبح لما اقوم اوكي، غير هذا خلاص يعني واحد ما هم راح يدفع كاش، يعني ما راح تصير ولا مصيبه راح تكون.
أنا كمان لما يعني كنت طالبة بالجامعة، وهون حتى يعني طلبتنا عم شوفهم إنه كتير بيعتمدوا على مشروبات الطاقة. يعني لسه يمكن أنا ما رح أحكي من وجهة نظر علمية، بس رح أحكي من وجهة نظر إنه أنا يعني أو ملاحظة عامة، إنه أتليست بمعلومات البسيطة إنه القهوة ممكن حتى يكون فيها نوع من الإفادة يعني. بس مشروبات الطاقة أنا بلاقيها بكثرة عندنا هون، خصوصا بين جيل الشباب. يعني حتى أنا بالنسبة لي فكرة إنه للأسف في شركات دون ذكر اسمها لما توصل لمرحلة تبيعك أو تعطيك مشروب الطاقة بلا مقابل، مفروض أنا بالنسبة لي يعني عقلي بيقول لي حط question mark، إنه أنا عم تعطيني منتج من غير فلوس، توزيع، حرفيا توزيع. سواء أنا أيام بالجامعة من 10 سنين أو حتى لهلأ في شركات بتستمر إنه توزع مشروبات الطاقة. والناس لسه مش مستوعبة هذا الضرر. فكيف إحنا بنقدر نفيدهم، وشو ممكن يكون بديل يعني غير النوم؟ أنا قصدي كشيء.
الشركات توزع كل شيء ببلاش، ما هذا ماركتينج، ما أعتقد في نية سيئة من وراء هالشيء. بس هو يعني نفيدهم ان نقول نتكلم عن الكافيين يعني ومضراته، ويعني كل شيء بالاعتدال اوكي يعني. بس يعني اوكي باخذ كولا في كافيين فاين، بس الاشياء الثانيه جدا يعني خاصه الناس، اكو ناس يحبون والله يعني ياخذون شيء يعلي وشيء يوطي بنفس الوقت، فياخذون الريد مشروب طاقه وياخذون شيء عكسي بنفس الوقت. فهذا يعني ممكن وايد ناس يعني هالشيء ادى الى موت. So constant number of hours. Yeah, listen. يعني I trained myself when I was around your age, so 20, 21, 22, to sleep 8 hours a night. So right now I close my eyes and they open 8 hours later. And it took me a while to train myself. That's why I'm able to. I mean, I do so many things during the day with high energy. If I didn't sleep, there's no way I could do a quarter of what I do. But it's very important. And there's something called sleep hygiene. So, for example, my kids, they shower, then they have dinner, then they brush their teeth, then mom reads the story, mom reads Quran, they sleep. I'm not telling you to read Quran or to read, although you should brush your teeth, maybe. But the idea is that you need a schedule to follow. And the schedule, this is what we call sleep hygiene. Once you do that, then your brain, for example, like my kids, by the time they're brushing their teeth, they start yawning because the brain knows the sleep is coming. Number one. Number two, do not touch anything with blue light. Your iPad is bad news. In fact, research has shown that people on their iPads at night, when they drive the next morning, it's like they've had alcohol, right? So it really can affect you, right? So that should not be part of the process of falling asleep. Something I'd recommend, like if you're having problems falling asleep, again, my app in Arabic is coming out to Hoon. Calm is good, Headspace is good, stuff to listen to at night. And that can put you to bed. I recommend that way before any kind of medication intervention.
طيب دكتور، بعد إذنك في مجال إنك تكتب لنا بس الويب سايت تبع حضرتك بالشات عشان الكل يشوفه؟
So you can sign up best right now. هو للحين ما نزل الاب، حينزل شهر 8 سوري شهر 11 اخر شهر 11. هذا اللي موجود، هذا اللي راح يطلع. اللي موجود حاليا اسمه تنويم، بس تنويم راح يصير جزء من تهون لما يطلع تهون. وعلى السوشيال ميديا هي تنويم هي تهون اب وتنويم بس just hypnotherapy، لكن باللغه العربيه الفصحى، معناته نص الكلام ما يفهم اللي قاعد اقوله. بس التهون راح يكون بلغه بيضاء، ما راح يكون بالفصحى، راح يكون يعني لهجه خليجيه او لهجه بيضاء. فهذه الاشياء تعلمتها لان وقت اللوك داون سويت تنويم كثير على انستغرام باللغه العاميه، والناس وايد عجبهم اكثر من التنويم باللغه الفصحى. ففي النيو اب كله بالعامي راح يكون، بس مو بس لهجه كويتيه وسعوديه ويعني من المنطقه.
بس للتوضيح، تهون.com وتهون اب راح يكونوا باخر نوفمبر. بس
تهون.com موجود الحين في بلوج. يو كان ساين اب عشان اول ما ينزل يجيك ايميل على طول يقول لك انه نزل. بس تنويم موجود حاليا.
اوكي، تنويم بوث الويب سايت والابلكيشن موجودين.
يس
خلص تمام. في اي حدا عنده سؤال؟ I think إنه كانت دانيا بس سألة سؤال قبل ما حضرتك تكتب
عن النوم. Yeah, I mean it's not advisable. So يعني if you're sleeping 12-14 hours, that's a sign of depression basically. So the best sleep is 8 hours at night and a 20 to 30 minute nap. I don't take naps. If I could, I would, but that's the best prescription for sleep. And again, I really highly recommend the book. You will thank me for reading it. Why We Sleep is amazing. Written by a Harvard researcher.
أنا بس أكتبه. Why We Sleep.
Yeah, Why We Sleep. لماذا ننام موجود بالعربي.
دي ذات السلاسل صح؟
Yes.
ذات السلاسل. تمام. في حدا عنده أي سؤال؟
ذات السلاسل بالعربي، ما ادري عن الانجليزي. لماذا ننام موجود بالعربي، بس I don't know about English انا شريته اونلاين يعني.
اوكي تمام. شكرا كثير.
حياكم الله، ساعة مباركة.
شكرا كثير دكتور، يعطيك الف عافية، فعلا استمتعنا بهاي السيشن.
حياكم الله.
وان شاء الله بنرجع نشوفك اكيد يعني عشان نستفيد من معلومات حضرتك كثير قيمة. عن جد شكرا.
حياكم الله، شوف معك خير.
تسلم، مع السلامة.